I'm Rob Bell, an engineer with a thirst for understanding how things work. Join me on a journey to investigate the incredible structures that have stood the test of time and their ground during what was to become a global war. "1940, following the fall of France and the devastating defeat at Dunkirk, Britain stood alone against the onslaught of the unstoppable Nazi menace. With her back against walls not yet built, construction began on an epic project, transforming this green and pleasant land into an impregnable island fortress.
We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender."
Churchill's rousing speech of defiance laid out the plan for Britain's defence. Each week, I'll be exploring the streets, hills, and landscape he spoke of to uncover the monumental, mysterious, and heroic buildings that helped us win the war. Today, nearly 80 years later, thousands of seemingly random structures still litter our countryside. In many cases, they're just blocks of concrete you might see during a daily commute or pass by on a weekend walk. But if you know what you're looking at, behind these remnants of bricks and mortar, there's a much darker story to be told. It's a tale of terror and fear. At a time when fascism overran the rest of Europe, Britain stood alone. Today, often all that's left to remind us of those dark days are these crumbling remains. But in their day, they were the buildings that fought Hitler. After the fall of France, the Germans were poised just across the English Channel. If they had invaded, they would have run up against a thin coastal crust designed to halt them on the shoreline. But what if these defences had failed? What was the plan if the fighting on the beaches was lost and the battle moved onto the fields and hedgerows? Today, perhaps the most common and visible reminder of the buildings that fought Hitler are structures like these. I think a lot of us are probably quite used to seeing old pillboxes hidden away in hedgerows or on the edges of fields and canals. And their placement might seem quite random, but they're not. They're actually part of an integrated and intricate defence system known as stop lines. These stop lines were the brainchild of a man upon whose thankfully broad shoulders the defence of Britain had come to rest.
The Commander-in-Chief of the Home Forces, Edmund Ironside, came up with this plan for a defence system to basically thwart the enemy invasion, but then if that was to happen, to try and contain them. We also have the country being compartmentalised. So there are 50 kind of stop lines right the way from Kent up to Scotland.
In 1939, he'd expected to be made commander of the British Expeditionary Force, but he's made commander of the Imperial General Staff. And with the fall of France, the entire responsibility for the defence of Britain falls on the shoulders of tiny Ironside.
Faced with this immense responsibility, Ironside reached for a solution straight out of the World War I playbook: vast lines of fixed defences known as stop lines. Hoping to delay and effectively reroute any German advance, engineers and military strategists quickly drew up plans for around 50 static, fortified stop lines around the country. And they were to be formed from a combination of pillboxes, gun emplacements, trenches and barbed wire. and wherever possible, make use of any natural features, like the estuary here.
The most important of the stop lines was the GHQ stop line, which passed just to the south of Reigate in Surrey.
If the Germans had managed to get off the beaches, if the breaches hadn't held them, this is where they would arrive. To my rear is the GHQ stop line. To the south of me is Gatwick Airport, now an international airport, then a racecourse. To my right-hand side is the A217, the old Brighton Road. It's one of the main routes into London. If this is breached, there's nothing to stop them till they reach the North Downs. London's after that. It's as simple as that. But this is part of a vast, long defence line made up of pillboxes, trenches, because this is it. This would be the killing grounds of Surrey.
The principle behind the GHQ line, or the stop line as it was known, was that you can't quite second guess where the Germans are going to come. So you would have initial defences, coastal defences and all the rest of it. And then once you could see where the Germans were having their main thrust, then you could bring in your reserves behind this defensive line, and you would then defend and then counterattack from that position.
The greatest of all the stop lines was known as the GHQ line, the General Headquarters line, that ran all the way from end of the Forth River up in Scotland right down to near Newcastle, York, down to Cambridge. It errs towards the eastern seaboard. It skirts round London to the south of London, and then it goes from east to west, roughly from the Thames across to the Bristol Channel.
The GHQ stop line was a huge undertaking, and the concentration of defences south of Reigate are a key point, standing on one of the main routes between the south coast and London.
We're standing outside a superb example of an anti-tank pillbox. You can see just through the aperture, the entrance at the front, you can see little bolts sticking up, and that's where a 6-pounder anti-tank Hotchkiss gun will be fitted. The back of it is actually quite wide open because the weapon has to be put in and taken out easily. And on the side, a little bit sticking out, you can fire out across the road to stop anybody coming around the rear. It's not in isolation. It's backed up behind me by 2 more pillboxes, just a few yards up from there. Now these are made out of concrete, reinforced, and then there is a brick facing on the outside. As you can see, the weather has not been kind to them. Nowadays, 80 years on, instead of soldiers sheltering in there from enemy fire, we have cows sheltering in there from the weather. It's a bit unpleasant in the back of it. Across the fields in this direction, we can see another one under a tree over there, and they all could fire upon each other in self-support, so to speak. They're not thrown down at random, as some people seem to consider, oh, willy-nilly and all that sort of business. They're not. There is a plan there. You're safe in there with concrete and everything, but trenches on the outside are safer to be in, because guess what? That's a bullet magnet. Everything's going to be going at that. So you'd have supporting infantry on either side. We have a bridge over here crossing the River Mole. It's quite an old one, looks slightly Victorian. That will be blown. The river here is about 8 to 10 feet deep. Could be quite low in the summer, but in the autumn, as it is at the moment, it's nearly 60 feet wide. The Germans have pioneered assault craft. They can get across it, but they're going to be doing it under fire. So,
Standing somewhere like this, it's easy to see the strategic importance of such sites and what would be at stake if they were breached. But just how were these crumbling structures meant to operate? And more importantly, would they be effective against the might of the Nazi invaders? In 1940, General Tiny Ironside became the commander of the British Land Army. But due to a drastic shortage of manpower and weaponry, he simply didn't have the resources to defend over 400 miles of coastline, as well as some of the more remote regions that would have been perfect for German paratrooper landings. And so to solve the problem he came up with an integrated feat of engineering genius. And today, one of the best preserved is the Taunton stop line.
To understand the Taunton stop line, I've asked historian Neil Story and author Andrew Powell Thomas to explore this West Country defence system.
Why this one?
Well, the Taunton stop line was essentially kind of that last bastion. If an invasion happened in the southwest, this would be the line that would have to hold it up for 1, 2, maybe 3 days. And it was essentially making sure that the West Country was boxed off, and it would allow the opportunity for the troops held up in the Midlands to come down and sort the problem out.
That I know that they worried about Plymouth. Now, Plymouth had its own stop line around it.
Absolutely. The Plymouth, you kind of utilised the old kind of Napoleonic and Palmerston forts that were built around the city, and they were largely in place before the Second World War started. So that was already fairly well protected as such, but this was brand new, and it's absolutely something that we could go and explore.
We've got nearly 50 miles of this to explore.
The northern end of the stop line begins up just to the north of Bridgewater at Paulet.
Somerset.
Traces that line, making the most of those kind of, those natural and those man-made features. The Bridgewater and Taunton Canal, the Taunton and Chard Canal.
So it goes all the way from Bristol Channel,
Yep.
right the way down to here to what, Lyme Bay?
Absolutely, yeah. So down to Axmouth, just opposite Seaton. The English Channel, obviously, there's a huge threat that a potential invasion would come right across the channel, and it stretches coast to coast, end to end, no gaps in the middle. It's phenomenal.
There's coastal batteries down here.
Absolutely, yeah. We've got railway blocks, road blocks, barbed wire, areas that would have been mined as well.
Anti-tank.
Absolutely, anti-tank ditches. They've thought of everything. It's phenomenal. To think that it was planned and built all within 2 to 3 months. I'm going to suggest that maybe you have a look at this really interesting village more in the middle of Somerset. This is Knoll St Giles, and there's a really unusual emplacement there. Very out of keeping with the rest of that section of the stop line.
It's incredible to think that all that Andrew and Neil are off to see was planned and built in only 3 months. But even in 1940, the thinking behind these lines seemed somewhat old-fashioned.
So the experience of the First World War with this kind of static trench warfare informs both French and British thinking. We've got the Maginot Line of fortifications in France, and we've got Ironside, who is developing these concrete bunkers. We have the pillboxes, and it'd be interesting knowing that the Germans completely circumvented the Maginot Line as to whether they would have worked in Britain.
This strategy didn't look good, but with their backs to the wall, what else was Britain to do? At the northern end of the stop line, Andrew is at a possible German landing zone. A raiding force heading up this river could have been disastrous if not quickly confronted.
This solitary pillbox, located here at Paulet, sits on the banks of the tidal River Tone, and it links the Bristol Channel to the port of Bridgewater, just a few miles downstream. The Royal Engineers were in charge of constructing all the stop lines, and there was a mixture of kind of national and local contractors that were used for the building. Obviously, getting the materials to such a remote location like this is a mission in itself. So one of the issues with the Bristol Channel was the worry a potential sea invasion would need to have a port to land the heavy materials that were involved. So the port of Bridgewater, with its docks already established, would have been a natural target for a German invasion. Well, as you can see, we've got these loopholes as part of the pillbox. The chaps in here would have probably had rifles. Goodness knows the state of those rifles, because as we know, the Home Guard had varying degrees of equipment. But you had a 3 or 4 man unit in here, and they are completely isolated by themselves. They're the first contact. Probably just with their rifles, no kind of light machine guns or anything, they would have been up against it. If a full invasion happened, this one pillbox by itself, you're a sitting duck here.
Although the men in this pillbox couldn't have stopped the invasion, they would have been able to raise the alarm and buy time for their comrades further down the river in Bridgewater. But for this, they would have had to pay the ultimate price. As the River Parrett snakes its way through the outskirts of Bridgewater, there are pillboxes every 100 yards, each one able to see its neighbour and give supportive fire if needed.
All of these pillboxes are the standard Type 24 pillbox. The walls are made of 12-inch concrete, that bulletproof thickness. The vast majority of the soldiers inside, Home Guard in particular, would have been armed with rifles. At this point, because of the concentration of forces and over 2,500 Home Guard within Bridgewater, they would have just had that small arms fire as opposed to light machine gun fire.
Bridgewater was strategically important because of its docks. Without them, the Germans would struggle to resupply their invading force. Meanwhile, the British would have had major concerns of their own.
In the event of an invasion, one of the biggest problems Britain faced was a lack of manpower and equipment. Ever since the British Expeditionary Force's evacuation from Dunkirk, the army was in a poor condition. It needed time to re-equip and retrain. A new force was needed to plug the gap and man the defence of Britain.
It fell on the Home Guard. Local volunteers, men aged between 18 and 65, to man these pillboxes.
To mark the birthday of the Home Guard, a unit drawn from the 1st County of London, Westminster Battalion, marched to Buckingham Palace.
At the start of the war, a civil defence force called the Local Defence Volunteers was established, known as the LDV.
The idea of the LDV was that they would look, duck, and vanish. In other words, they're looking out for parachutists that are coming down. Their role is to observe them and go and report it to the military authorities. LDV, look, duck, and vanish.
By May 1940, the government realised they needed a unit that could take on a combat role. They asked for volunteers for a new force, the Home Guard. They hoped for 500,000 volunteers. By August 1940, they had over 2.5 million. Dad's army turned the Home Guard into something of a joke, but the reality was far more complex.
I mean, an awful lot of people were pretty good, and they, of course, there were plenty of people with sort of grey hair and who were sort of veterans of the First World War. But the fact that they were veterans of the First World War meant they did have some kind of military training. There were also an awful lot of farmers who were involved in the Home Guard. And of course, the advantage these guys have is they tend to be a pretty good shot. They understand the lay of the land. They understand how to read the land, weather, all those kind of things, which are quite important for farming. So lots of them were pretty useful. And if you sort of think, you know, you've got sort of 2.5 million men in uniform by kind of mid-August 1940, that's a pretty good defensive force. I mean, there is something to be said that, you know, there is some kind of strength in numbers, even if you're a bit short on heavy guns and all the rest of it. That amount of men is quite a lot for the Germans to overwhelm.
An enemy tank on the main road is energetically tackled by Home Guard in ambush, and its occupants are faithfully dealt with. By way of robust climax, paratroops and defending Home Guard come to grips on the railway line. Look out, there's a train coming.
Inside the pillbox, you get a real sense of what it might have been like for the poor men who were on duty in here. Despite all these loopholes, you've got a very limited range of vision, and it wouldn't take much for someone to sneak around the outside, and if a grenade was thrown in here, you were done for. And the team of men in here would have had to have worked together in noisy, cramped, damp, and often isolated conditions. The walls give a horrible echoey sound, and you can imagine firing their rifles. The sound that would have generated in here would have been enough to disorientate you. The idea of the white ricochet wall in the center was to help protect the men on the other side of the pillbox should an attack happen. And you can really get the sense of why you've got all these interjoining pillboxes within 100-200 meters of each other to support in a time of conflict. Most pillbox in these isolated countryside and riverbank positions often had camouflage netting on the top. And on the top of this pillbox, we've still got some of the metal hooks in place that give you an idea of just how big that netting would have been.
"20 miles south of Bridgewater, Neil has arrived in Knoll St Giles.
Ah, yes. There is exactly
what Andrew was telling me about earlier. It's a gun emplacement. Here we are at Knowle St Giles. It's in the middle of nowhere. There would have been a railway track going along here once upon a time. So why on earth are you going to put a 6-pounder gun emplacement up there?
This is the gun that blasted the German 60-ton Tiger tank right out of North Africa.
6-pound anti-tank guns were in short supply after Dunkirk, so it's surprising to see one in Knowle St Giles, especially considering how much of the rest of the stop line only has rifle emplacements. So why was this gun put there?
Well, 2 miles just over there is Cricket Court. Now that happens to be the home of none other than Max Aitken. His title was Lord Beaverbrook, and they put him in charge of aircraft production. So he's a man that's not easily pleased, he's a man that knows what he wants, and at his local railway mark, he's going to want to see that things are being done for the defence of Great Britain. And that's why I think that emplacement is right here.
Beaverbrook was known as an exceptionally hard taskmaster, so it makes perfect sense he would demand a gun emplacement like this near his home. Beaverbrook used this strong personality to ensure the RAF had the planes they needed to fight the Battle of Britain. The men charged with fighting the Battle of Bridgewater, on the other hand, had a less glamorous part to play if invasion had come. This is one of the few remaining pillboxes in Bridgewater itself. Most of the rest have been demolished to make way for development. This pillbox defended 2 key transport routes, the road over the bridge and the train tracks beneath it.
This pillbox, as you can see, around 12-15 feet in its height, and if you look really carefully in amongst the ivy, you can notice the bricked-up entranceway. How the men would have got up there, I don't know. Maybe it was a ladder, maybe some steps, but it gives you a fantastic idea of what the Home Guard were prepared to do in Bridgewater.
Even in the town, the pillboxes weren't built in isolation. They were integrated with other obstacles to channel the German invaders so they could be more easily attacked.
These are anti-tank cubes. These are built about 100 metres from the train bridge, and they're linked to those pillboxes. There have been a row of these directing a potential invasion into the line of fire and stopping them having an easy escape from the town.
Although a lot of cash and construction effort was put into the front line of defences on these stop lines, they were primarily designed to operate as part of a fighting retreat. And as our reserves fell back, obviously the defences became a lot less well constructed and more vulnerable. With over 400 miles of poorly defended coastline, there was a very real threat of imminent invasion. Now, the first line of those stop line defences had the most money and effort put into them. But as we would have fallen back, those defences became poorer and a bit desperate.
So initially, I think they were built by Royal Engineers who were highly skilled and they're quite sophisticated. But over time, they needed to build more and more. And as they kind of moved further inland up to Scotland, then perhaps they were not quite the same quality.
There hadn't been a huge amount of testing carried out, particularly against modern weaponry. Yes, there were troops building them, but a lot of these troops, they weren't experienced builders. And you've also got civilian contractors. Some very honest, very good, but through the nature of speed, and some of them being frankly unscrupulous, but what appears a bomb-proof concrete layer on the top of your pillbox, that's great. But the brickwork, if you take a blow from the side, that will collapse. Down will come your very heavy concrete roof. One good strike from one heavy tank round, that could be it for you.
To make up for this lack of quality, the Royal Engineers looked for other advantages to help strengthen the defences.
These stop lines were a combination of natural obstacles, so canals and rivers and railways, for example, and then they would be supplemented by man-made obstacles.
This use of existing features is clear to see on the Bridgewater to Taunton Canal. Along its entire 12-mile length, there are pillboxes every couple of 100 yards.
Manned by the Home Guard, the pillbox behind me would have been occupied by a 3 to 4 unit group of men, and their two key aims would have been making sure that the locks and the bridge behind didn't fall into enemy hands.
By the following day, shock troops were able to get across the river.
Although individually these pillboxes wouldn't have given much resistance to an attacking force, together and fighting for their own homes and livelihoods, the idea was that these pillboxes, this canal, would have done enough to have delayed that force for hours or maybe even half a day. This would have allowed the army, the reserves that were held further up in the centre of the country, time to come down and deal with that invasion. So this example of one of the defences is a real blink and you miss it. Walking along the canal, you've got undergrowth, you've got trees everywhere, and yet on the top of this bank, there's a pillbox. It's a large one. It's very different to your normal pillbox with the loopholes. When we have a closer look at it, you can see that it would have held a much heavier and a bigger gun. And the range of vision from that emplacement would have been incredible. From the lock just behind us, all the way down, following the canal, it would have been a brilliant position. This is a Type 28 pillbox. The design of it is very different to the other pillboxes. The walls are 36 inches thick, which is designated shell-proof, and internally there'd have been a Vickers machine gun. On a tripod, that could fire up to 4,000 metres in range and shoot anywhere between 450 and 600 rounds a minute. With the range of fire, the field of vision that this emplacement would have had, combined with the fact you have the 12-foot wide canal just in front of it, it would have been incredibly hard for an attacking force to outflank and take this position.
This canal looks idyllic now, but sites like this would have been a nightmare for an attacking force to overcome. Every hour the Home Guard could buy gave the Army's High Command time to concentrate forces for a counterattack. Along the canal is a pillbox that has been half removed to allow access along the towpath. At the end of the war, landowners were paid £10 to remove structures on their land, but many didn't bother and simply kept the money. This one gives a good view of the internal blast wall and a chance to see how the walls were constructed.
The St. Michael Road Bridge here at Creech is like many of the 40 or so permanent bridges that cross the Taunton stop line. They had an extra aspect of defence, and it's these, demolition chambers. These would have been mined, and possibly the soldiers here would have had to face that awful prospect of setting them off and therefore blowing the bridge if it looked like the town was going to be taken. This would have obviously have hindered any advancing force in progressing further.
It's clear to see what Ironside's strategy was trying to achieve, but he had some surprising opposition to his stop-line plans.
Churchill, he was absolutely... he was appalled at the number of soldiers that were involved in building these stop lines and pillboxes. So were other military commanders. They were saying these men should be training to fight, not laying bricks and filling sandbags.
Despite these misgivings, the stop lines continued to grow. Andrew and Neil have met up again at a place that shows many of the defensive techniques that were used.
This is Donyat Halt, which by itself is just, a very small part of the stop line. We've got the remnants of the old Great Western Railway. During the Second World War, it was operational. And you can see we've still got the platform here. This was a single platform station. Lots and lots of evacuees actually came to Somerset and kind of got off their train at this very station. And then, you've got the blocks at the back. You've got them replicated kind of, another 200 metres further on. They're quite unusual.
They are.
And there's that worry with that kind of potential invasion that the mechanised infantry could use the railway tracks in order to move across. So we've got a very rudimentary form, but, it does the job. I mean, there must be 16, 18, 20 of them there. You can imagine trying to get your tanks across the tracks and up the slope in itself, and then you've got these things in the way. It's going to make it really hard, isn't it?
Well, they've used the natural features again.
That's it, and I think that's the key.
Where's the sea? Is it over that way?
Yep, over to your right, over there, in the distance. And then, of course, in the field just beyond, we can see just in that hedgerow, we've got a pillbox up there, and just round the corner, we've got 2 light machine gun emplacements as well. So they're really covering all bases here.
At the end of the platform, there's another part of the railway defence system. Large concrete blocks have been placed either side of the rail line with distinctive slots cut into them. These slots were designed so that a pre-cut section of rail would fit tightly between the blocks. As the German invaders approached, it could be swiftly dropped into place and the line effectively blocked to vehicles. These were replicated every 100 yards or so along the railway, each one slowing the German blitzkrieg by a few minutes, draining the momentum out of the advance.
So I thought we'd just take a quick detour and stop on the outskirts of Chard Reservoir, just to give, again, another look at those different aspects of those defences. It's not all about pillboxes.
So is this another old railway bed?
This track going along here is the part of the railway. You've got another couple of, we've got a whole line of anti-tank cubes in the background. We've got another rail block, but we've also got these, and I'm sure you can tell us all about these.
No, they are anti-tank posts. They look like a collapsed fence.
They do, don't they? They just look like a fence that's fallen over, but I think that 45-degree angle is crucial.
They're concrete, they're well emplaced, 45-degree angle, you've got a slope coming up there. I don't think an armoured fighting vehicle or a tank is going to like trying to get over those bad boys.
And here at Chard, we've got a row of well over 700 of these in situ on the top of the embankment.
In principle, stop lines were a good, if not slightly antiquated, knee-jerk defensive concept, but they weren't without their problems. They were costly to build, they needed manpower and equipment, both of which were in short supply. And as they generally only provided defence in one direction, they'd be ineffective against any kind of paratrooper attack. New thinking was needed. In July 1940, General Sir Alan Brooke took over command of Britain's home forces. He'd had first-hand experience fighting the modern, mobile, mechanised Nazis in France and was charged with coming up with an innovative, more offensive defensive concept. And he put an emphasis on having a mobile reaction force and stronger, more defensive, almost castle-like strongholds.
These new strongholds were named anti-tank islands. They were built at key points on the existing stop lines to hold important roads, railways or waterways. Large concentrations of men, equipment and defences would be gathered together, supposedly making it dangerous for the Germans to ignore. Andrew has brought Neil to one of these strongholds, although it doesn't look very menacing today.
This is the idyllically named Creech St Michael, and it's one of the anti-tank islands along the Taunton stop line. And like the other 11, it's not just about the pillboxes. The wider town was part of the defences, but as you can see, we've got something very interesting right behind us.
It's a very big pillbox for being out in the middle of nowhere.
It is, but when you kind of think of the strategic importance of this location, we've got the Bridgewater and Taunton Canal on one side. About 200 metres behind us, we've got the River Tone, and about 100 metres beyond that, we've got one of the main railway lines to the area. So you can kind of understand the significance of this area.
Would this be manned by Home Guard or military?
Looking at the size of it, this would, Home Guard would have been involved to know the kind of the local lay of the land, but this is a huge pillbox. This is beyond your normal
small embrasures, isn't it?
They're very small. I think it's more kind of rifle defences that they would have used as opposed to light machine guns.
Yes, you couldn't do an awful lot with a Bren out of one of those.
No, absolutely not. Your field of fire isn't that big, but it's a fantastic looking pillbox and it's in great condition.
The anti-tank island at Cheech St Michael had defences spread throughout the village. With large numbers of troops dug in alongside them, the hope was the German advance would lose momentum. Would this have worked? To answer that, we need to understand what had gone wrong in France.
As was proved by the Battle of France, the key thing is not the defensive positions, it's really communications. The British Army, together with the Home Guard, could they have coordinated themselves quickly enough and swiftly enough with what they had through their communication system? And that's the numbers of radios, the number of communication networks, and all the rest of it. That is more important than pillboxes along a riverbank.
One of the greatest disasters in history seemed in the making.
I mean, when you look at the German victory in France in May and June 1940, it's 50% German brilliance and 50% French ineptitude and failure. And the big key is that although the French had more men, more artillery pieces, more tanks, bigger, better tanks than the Germans, they still lost. You look at sort of 15th of May 1940, the French 1st Armoured Division is basically largely destroyed, even though they've got much bigger tanks and better tanks than the Germans have. And you have to ask yourself, well, why is that? The German panzers, the German tanks, which are small and very kind of, feeble, really, go forward, basically stick their tongues out at the French tanks. The tanks come rumbling towards them. The German tanks go beetling back and disappear into a wood. Lying in wait for the French tanks is a screen of German anti-tank guns. And the reason that's able to happen is because the men in the panzers, in the tanks, can communicate to the men manning the anti-tank guns and coordinate their effort. And that's why the French get destroyed.
This tremendous concentration of firepower continued all through the night.
Whatever happened, when the Germans arrived in Britain, the troops defending the Taunton stop line would require a steady supply of ammunition. The planners needed a safe place on the stop line to store the bullets and anti-tank shells.
This is Crimson Hill Tunnel, so we've got the old Taunton and Chard Canal going behind us, and to obviously avoid the hills behind, we've got a tunnel that's stretched on for over 1,500 metres, right through the hillside and out the other end. This is obviously a crucial point because if this fell into enemy hands, you can negate all the defences, nip through the hill, and you're out the other side. This hill was actually used for storing ammunition during the Second World War, out of sight, way out of the reach of any kind of German bombers from here. So it's a really important position. And to help with the protection, we've got a few anti-tank cubes still in, we can see.
So this
here.
should have been dry,
Absolutely.
carried the ammunition down here.
Yep, and stored it away for use as and when.
Fantastic.
It's a brilliant location, isn't it? It's so far out the way.
Very safe from bombing.
So as well as the anti-tank cubes down here, we've got a whole row of them across the top of the tunnel as well. Again,
you can see one from up here.
Absolutely, just stopping, anyone getting past.
Andrew and Neil have climbed Crimson Hill, one of the highest points on the stop line, and a place that gives a strong sense of what a huge undertaking this was.
Well, what a view. This is the end of our tour of the stop line, and what a place to end. And look ahead, you can see the pillboxes, and you can literally see that stop line running away right across the countryside. And, you can see for miles up here, can't you? because we've got these two emplacements right at the top of the hill. And I'm just fascinated by the fact that these are they're built into the ground, aren't they? Yes. That extra protection that the hill's going to give these emplacements.
But they've done that all the way along this stop line. You will use the canals, you'll use the rivers, the natural features. You can deepen some to make a good anti-tank ditch. To have this view from these emplacements. And if you look across here, this field of fight, that's quite a bowl as well, isn't it?
It's vast, isn't it? It's a lot of miles there.
We've seen just some of the defences on the Taunton stop line. It's incredible that all this was built in just 3 months. But the big question was, were these buildings and structures worth it? Could these stop lines have halted a German invasion?
When you look at what happened in France, if you've got a serious defence like the Maginot Line, Germans just go round it. And you're left stranded, my friend, wondering where have they all gone? And they've just found that gap in a natural defence, or someone's flung up a pontoon bridge across a river or a canal, and they're rumbling by.
I do worry about these stop lines. I mean, they look good on a map. And if you're a general or a politician, you go, well, it's all right if that goes because we've still got that line. And, and a line on a map is very seductive if you're planning things. But, a line on a map is something that can be ignored by an attacking force if they can go around that line, because these lines aren't going to be as complete as they look on a map. There might be half a mile or a mile or two in which, there is no defence, for one reason or another. That is going to be, it's like water is going to find its way through. And any decent attacking force is going to bypass any of these defences, and they're just going to overrun it.
Thankfully, these defences were never put to the test. So all we can do is speculate as to whether Ironside's plan would have worked.
I think the criticism of the stop line system was very much that we're letting them get that far.
Yeah.
When, as Churchill said, we should fight them on the beaches.
And I think the Taunton stop line, one of the reasons I've been intrigued by this for years and researched so much into it, is that there's so much of it still standing. The location of these placements and these fixed positions, they're on the edge of canals, they're on the side of farmers' fields.
This is one of our last bastions that would have been there. This is our shield against the tanks, against the forces that could have been coming. One of the best intact parts. In some ways, it's even an extension, isn't it, of the GHQ line. You can see the influence of its construction all around here.
Today, pillboxes like this and remnants of these stop lines are the most visible remaining reminder of one of the darkest periods in recent British history. Up and down England, they would have been vital had the Nazi forces started sweeping across our countryside. But fortunately, they were never put to the test.